Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Zoom celebration, really, for Hand Picked 2020, which is currently on show at VIVIANEART in Calgary. I am Vivian Mayer, and I'm just going to introduce the Zoom conversation tonight because I'd really like the stars of the show to be our four artists, Raewyn Reid, Skylar Eyre, Uii Savage, and Gabby Coates. And the conversation will be led by Jenna Klein-Waller from VIVIANEART's team, who has co-curated the exhibition with me and really has grabbed the reins in the latter part of making this all happen. So I really wanted her to be your guide tonight in this conversation. Hand Picked is an exhibition which is now in its 7th running. It's an invitational that VIVIANEART has hosted every single year since we opened our doors in 2013. It's something I'm quite proud of. We have an opportunity to have brand new grads from the Alberta University of the Arts and people who are just beginning their artistic careers in the Calgary arts community to take part in a curated exhibition that celebrates the launch of their career. So these four artists all graduated this past spring from AU Arts. They had a virtual convocation, and now they're having a virtual celebration of the opening of the exhibition. You can, in fact, at least at this time, still visit the exhibition in person. And very soon we will have a virtual tour of the exhibition on our website. But we can't really congregate to celebrate in person right now. So I just want to raise my glass to toast the 7th running of Hand Picked 2020. Here's to these wonderful artists and to Jenna and to all of you who are joining to watch. Enjoy the conversation and the wonderful personal approach these artists have brought to their practices. I think you'll enjoy what they have to say. I'm going to bow out.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Vivian.
everyone.
Cheers.
Well, thank you all for coming. As Vivian said, I had kind of an end co-curation of this exhibition, so I kind of hopped on as Vivian was kind of hopping off. So it's been such an absolute pleasure to get to know each of you and to see all of your work and go through install with each of you. This is my 3rd time being involved in Hand Picked, and I can truly say that Hand Picked is probably one of my favorite exhibitions that I work with on a regular basis. The fact that you guys open your studios to us, the fact that you take the time out of your practices for us is really, really humbling and really rewarding for me as an emerging curator. So I'm really grateful to all of you for this experience. And to sit and look at your work every day is really wonderful. So thank you. I'm really pleased to, I guess I'll re-announce who all of you are. So we have Gabby Coates, Skylar Eyre, Raewyn Reid, and Uii Savage. All 4 of you are recent UA Arts graduates from the class of 2020. And all 4 of you use your practice in a way to navigate and ultimately reject current social constructs through your practice. So I would say that all of your practices are quite distinct and quite different from one another. But what really strikes me about your work is how, in your own skillful and considered way, you're creating really deeply personal work that has a relevance outside of the self. So you're kind of transcending your own identity, and you're transcending all of that into something that's really powerful and something that teaches us that visual art can create change, and visual art can make a difference, and that can challenge and inspire. And that's really something that's really powerful right now, particularly. So I'd like to start there, just kind of talking about that curatorial premise, and if anyone has anything that they'd like to add to that. Does that sound on base? Does that sound about right? I know we had a few conversations about what the curatorial premise of the show and what you kind of knew about each other's work in the past, because you did work together through AU Arts and you did know each other's practices before. So does anyone have anything to add about the entire body of work as a whole after seeing the exhibition? Nobody? Okay.
I think it's really interesting to sort of see how this comes to a head, even just like considering our time spent at AU Arts together and the way that we all sort of ended up crossing paths and really running within the same circle. But I think especially in regards to the curatorial premise of the show, that we all are working, with these very like in-depth theoretical bases, but are also really making that autoethnographic as well, and really, making it about ourselves and about like our experiences as these marginalized bodies, essentially like navigating our way through a system that isn't meant for us.
Yep, that's really lovely put, Skylar. Thank you. I think that we'll just lead right into talking about everyone's work. So why don't we go into Skylar? So Skylar is a multidisciplinary artist, sculpture and video practice. They explore ideas of queer resistance and subversion. Eyre's work is informed by his rural upbringing and draws from both masculine and feminine iconography, as well as a means to reconcile his own experiences as a queer cisgendered male. Eyre, am I saying that right? Yes, I should have asked that first. Eyre is a recent graduate from the AU Arts with a BFA in painting and has shown with FemWave and Five Art merchandise. So Skylar, if you would like to kind of give us a little bit of a brief overview of your work aside from that, that would be wonderful.
So I'm really making my work from an autoethnographic lens. And right now I'm really exploring my rural upbringing within a small town in BC, and how gender stereotypes and gender binaries really enacted themselves there in a really toxic way. And simultaneously, at the same time within my work, I'm really thinking about like these projections of queer futurity and queer resistance, and thinking about my own familial upbringing within like a resistive culture, and really thinking about the ways that by being visibly queer, you reject these social sort of guidelines that have been given to us by heteropatriarchy that deem queerness as the other. And so with that, I've been looking and reading at the writings of Jose Esteban Munoz. He has a book that's called Cruising Utopia, and within it there's this one chapter that's called Queer and Punk. It's about like queer and punk performativity and utopian projections of performativity. And so I feel like it's important to also mention that I'm really looking at like these queer and punk sensibilities within just the making of my work as well, because they both in themselves are based in so much resistance as well, and especially have this tendency to be fast and immediate and direct. And I feel like that is how I like to make my work, and like the work is dirty and it is fast and it is immediate, and it like really just needs to like get its point across immediately. So within that, I'm thinking about like this metaphor of the fight and like what that means for myself and like my own personal story, as well as like thinking of the fight for the queer community as well against this like common enemy. And simultaneously within that, I'm also thinking about the gender binaries that come with fighting, and like how it is this very masculine sport and this thing that is like revered by men. So within the works that I have at VIVIANEART, they are pictorial based and are displaying these masculine bodies that are like fighting one another, that are also making love to one another, that are one body but are many bodies in one, in this way to sort of like deny any binary and any way of thinking, and to really be resistive by purposefully allowing something to not be compartmentalized.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you are working, I see that like that fast action in your work, but it comes out in a really powerful way. when you're choosing materials, because you're so interdisciplinary, like especially in the works in our exhibition, you have textile, you have chain, you have paper. Do you find that these materials kind of have the choice in your material, does it impact the art that you're making? Or is the material choice as well something that's fast and immediate?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the materials that I'm using are really allowing me to be fast and immediate, and also at the same time be able to like work with a lot of care in certain areas and like tenderness and intimacy. And I feel like the makings of the work themselves are these very performative things where my entire body is in it, like working either incredibly fast or like very slow and focused. And there's like a heavy emphasis on oil pastel and oil stick within the show. And I've been really using oil pastel because it's sort of like a higher quality crayon. And in that sense, I've also been thinking about like juvenility and my queer juvenility, and how because of like these heteropatriarchal guidelines and narratives that like when I was a teenager and actually in my youth, I never got to have like a queer youth as like a closeted teen. And so now I'm really essentially just in my queer youth and in this juvenile state that also comes with like a lot of unknowing as well. And so, yeah, so I feel like it just lends itself really well to what I'm trying to do.
That's amazing. Thank you. Okay, let's move into Raewyn. Raewyn Reid is an arts practice, exists as an ongoing survey of the pluralities of queer expression and gender identity. Their work investigates the politics of LGBTQ2SIA+ identities and the complex historical narratives that continue to orient queer bodies as other. Reid graduated as valedictorian from the AU Arts in 2020 with a BFA in drawing and a minor in ceramics. So Raewyn, would you like to kind of speak about this body of work? And then I think I'd like to talk a little bit more about your practice as a whole, because I know this body of work is a little bit unique compared to the rest of your practice.
Yeah, it is. So this is a series of work that I did called A Community Without Strangers. And it's sort of like an ongoing thing that I'm still working on, and I think I'll be working on for a while. But these 5 prints are all sort of different queer spaces from the Calgary community that have kind of come and gone. And some of them are still established, like the community-wise center is still around, the backlot's still around, but there have been so many different bodies kind of moving through these spaces and different organizations. And I'm really interested in just sort of like all of the stories that kind of come with these different spaces, and the way that they have really kind of like shaped the queer community in Calgary, but yet are these things that aren't really talked about, like they're kind of written out of the narrative.
Could you kind of to talk about your process and how you ended up with these images?
Yeah, so these are all photographs that I took and then printed and then cut out and then rephotographed with sort of like dramatic lighting, and then printed again on photocopies. And then the final prints are acetone transfer prints. And so they're sort of like pressed into the paper using acetone and really heavy burnishing. Yeah, and I think they're really sort of like crafted from this process of removal is like this thing that I'm really interested in, is every time that like through every stage they lose more detail and kind of become like more stagnant in a way. And yeah.
That almost adds like a ghostly presence to these spaces that once held such importance in the community. So I think that's really accurate for like how the work is made versus the content of the work. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and sort of this idea of like losing the details, you know, like the only reason why like I know about these spaces is from like the research that's been done by folks like Mark Klimperg or Kevin Allen, but the resources are very few and far between. And a lot of people, when they think about Calgary's history, they think about kind of like cowboy culture and oil and you know, like we have this very rich, vibrant queer history that we're sitting on, but it's kind of slowly falling away and being kind of like lost and forgotten, and especially the details of it.
Yeah.
So.
Is this something that your entire practice has explored, or is this body of work very unique to this kind of idea?
I think that this is like very much a like a dovetail on kind of the other works that I've done. Like works like in this one, there's the backlot, which is still like an active queer space today. But the sign from the backlot actually used to be in Mert's Beauty Parlor, which was like a gay bar back in the 1970s. And the backlot was sort of this like theater space that was like kind of off to the side that was used for like a lot of different things. And that I guess after they demolished Mertz, they like somebody from the community like snuck in and stole the backlot sign, and now it kind of like sits on the backlot today. But I've done works about like Mert's Beauty Parlor or a Women's Place bookstore, which one of the prints is the address today of a Women's Place bookstore, but is not like the original building. And that space is super interesting because it was sort of this queer feminist bookstore in the 1980s. And Carolyn Anderson, the person who used to run it, used to actually like order, because they weren't able to get books with queer content, like it wasn't legal to bring them into Canada. And so she used to order them to friends' places in like Montana and drive across the border and smuggle them back to Calgary and stock her bookstore with these things. And they used to have a lavender door on the front. So I've done works like sort of about the lavender door and sort of these like thresholds that, you know, block us from learning about like our history and kind of where we've come from, because it's so overshadowed by this sort of, you know, patriarchal storyline that Calgary is so attached to.
Very much so. Wonderful. Thank you, Raewyn.
Thank you.
We're going to move to Uii. Uii Savage is a digital media artist whose work through video and animation to address virtual intimacy, parasocial relationships, and artificial existence. Their work seeks to uncover and propose an alternative reality of social media networks designed to polarize and disorient. They graduated from Alberta University of the Arts with a BFA in Media Arts in 2020 and were awarded the Board of Governors Graduated Student Award. So Uii's work, working in technology, and we have the video as well, which I hope we can get a little peek of as well. But Uii, if you want to speak to your work a little bit.
Sure. So that's great. I definitely work in the digital realm. And so historically, my practice is very installation-based and very video-based. And I guess in terms of the work that I submitted for VIVIANEART, the work titled series is Now We're Living Like Strangers. And so I'm very interested in networked existence and the extension of the self in social media platforms, and to some extent, the structure of social media, various social media platforms. So this work is specifically referencing artificially intelligent influencers. And through what I guess I think I'm doing is this idea of exploring orientation in these spaces. And that would be referencing Sarah Ahmed's queer feminology work. And the way she explains it is that we are oriented towards certain objects, and that's how we find our way. And Sarah Ahmed in particular talks about sexual orientation and exploring queerness through this feminology. I definitely am exploring this work from the stance of being simultaneously fixated by the space of social media, but also hypercritical of it. So it's both my obsession and my enemy in some instances. And I think that we're living in a moment in particular right now where there's been a lot of talk and a lot of articles and a lot of recent documentaries talking about the polarizing and disorienting effects of these spaces. So I really try to highlight that through my work and create this experience of watching something between an ambient blended with noise music video that might be mesmerizing in one instance, but then extremely disruptive. And I think of that as a form of resistance.
Great. Can you speak slightly about the process of the imagery that comes into the video?
Sure, yeah. So I work in 3D animation, and I do work with objects in 3D animation. So the way I think of queer feminology and orientation towards objects, I'm relaying that framework onto 3D modeling. And I think I also am very interested in the history of 3D animation and objects as a framework for visioning and for futurity, particularly as it's been used in the real world through engineering industries for space exploration and colonization, and in cinema and music videos. So a lot of my work is using found images on the internet and turning a form of like reproduction into a poor image. Hito Sterl writes about, actually coined that term, the poor image. And it's in particular referencing an image that is like distributed for free, its quality is bad, its resolution is like substandard. It's essentially one that like compresses and deteriorates over use and time. And it fits into this like class society of appearances. So I think that the poor image in this instance is one that transforms itself into an accessible one, because it defies this measure of the original or the single, which can be very, which can be like language appropriated by capitalism to talk about innovation in some ways.
Awesome, thank you. Last but not least, we'll go to Gabby. So Gabby Coates is Gabby Coates' multidisciplinary practice explores female archetypes, pop culture tropes, and particularly cowboy culture. Working in large-scale oil pastel drawings, found object sculpture, and photography, Coates explores topics of vice, shame, hedonism, and ultimately asks, what does it mean to be a woman in a heteropatriarchal society? Coates is a recent graduate from Alberta AU Arts with a BFA in drawing. So Gabby, can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so definitely I think the red thread that has been through all of my work for the past couple of years is really asking the question, what does it mean to be a woman or a man? Like, I've just been really interested in gender binaries in general. I've been really curious around intersections of patriarchy and how the system works to advantage or disadvantage me. I frequently am the topic of my work recently, so I really am activating my identity and acknowledging things like my whiteness, my fake blondness, my straightness, my cisgenderedness, and how those are all potentially advantages for the most part and play into my privilege, but then how those things also disadvantage me in other ways. I've been recently, probably for the last year, looking at everything through the lens of cowboy culture, which is very specific to being rooted here in Calgary, Alberta. I have family who ranching still, so I have a family history of it, and on both sides of my family actually, and I still have family friends, so there's a lot of ties for me in the community and an actual sense of knowledge about what ranching culture is actually like. So I was really curious around how Calgary specifically, and I mean a lot of other places, have this really romanticized mythology of the cowboy versus its like gritty reality. So I kind of started to really dive deep into research of my own stories, and then specifically women's historical role in rodeo. So that was really interesting because it was a really feminist path that women had to carve out because there was no place for them in rodeo. So they had to make place for themselves. So alongside this research, I'd also been really engaged in Riot Girl research as well. So feminist punks of the 90s, particularly a younger female audience. So both of those things in tangent really started to inform my body of work and were contributing to this idea of like that I had of like this punk cowgirl who was, you know, at times like very sloppy but wanting to be put together, and this like confusion and contradiction that I like found myself at time and time again with like asking questions about my own identity, but then asking these questions in a larger sense of like where do I fit in, and like why do people want to compartmentalize like other identities into boxes to understand them better when things can't really exist like that. So I think I've been looking a lot at like matriarch and patriarch and how those inform inherited behaviors. So that's also where addiction comes into play, and how you know, why do we learn the things that we do, and like why are traditions so familiar to us and so easy to continue on with and not really break. So I've been really interested about, you know, feminine control in a male dominated fantasy, and how my reworking and rewriting of these cultural myths and tropes through Ms. Pilsner Canada, who is my alter ego, who is represented in most of my work, and how she is this potential like facet for change and complacency in a system, and she's both. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Gabby. Your materials, you kind of also vary in what you choose to work with. Do you go to a certain material for a reason? A found object, sculpture, paper? Do you feel that these material choices have an impact on the content of your work? Or is it kind of just, again, similar to Skylar, is that he's using these kind of immediate materials? And I see that in your work a little bit, where except for ceramics, which is a kind of offset to that, but I see this immediacy, and I kind of see this this like the Riot Girl, the unpolished aspect of your work in unison with this polished aspect.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's very similar to Skylar's work in the sense of immediacy is really important for me. The punk sensibility of making is really important to me. So the do it right now, do it yourself. It doesn't matter if it looks amazing. It's really about what you have to say. So, and it is like about being able to jump. I'm like, oh, today I want to sculpt with beer cans, and today I want to draw, you know, same thing, the juvenileness that comes with working in oil pastels, which kind of then mirrors this idea, oh, I don't really know what I'm talking about. Like there's a certain like, not innocence, but naivety in a way of this like topic matter, especially I think for me in terms of alcohol consumption and how that's so glamorized, and how we all, you know, you think you know everything and you don't. So yeah, no, it's just wherever the medium is feeling best and whatever's working, and maybe one day I'll slow down and get a little more refined, but not right now.
I think the refinement, or the lack of refinement, adds a quality to work. I don't think that refinement necessarily is a goal that needs to be met. I think that's something, it works for some practices and it doesn't work for other practices. There's power in that immediacy. And so I think that it's working for both of you. And then it's interesting when you have, I feel like with Raewyn's practice, it's quite particular, and I sense like a little bit of a slowness in the practice. It takes time. There's photographs, it has to be cut. Like there's a slowness to the practice. And I feel that with Uii's as well. So I think you kind of both, there's like a divide in how you work. We have the fast and the immediate, and then we have the more slow and deliberate, but you're all kind of working within the same framework of what you're trying to express. Does anyone have anything you want to talk about? Any questions for anyone else? Great, I'll just keep on talking then. I think I'd like to kind of talk about your experience now that school is over. And I think that's hard. That's a hard transition for any artist, is to leave the institution to be done with school. But I think it's kind of been escalated this year, having COVID and having a pandemic. And I'm curious how your practice has been changed post-institution, if your practice has changed post-institution, if you're still creating work as the same, or if your body work is changing now. You don't have to kind of fit into academia and you don't have to fit into deadlines. So does anyone have anything to speak on that?
I'll jump in here because I feel like this is something I've been really meditating a lot on recently. Is the struggle of being an artist is very real. And I think what I've just kind of come back to in the last little while is that you have to be hungry for it, and there's a level of desire that has to be met if you want to make the art. And I think being in the academic institution, there's certain things that get lost that you're kind of take for granted a little bit. And getting out of the institution now, I was like, oh wow, that was like really amazing that I actually had all this, like these different studios literally at my fingertips, and the materials and the knowledge. Whereas in the real world, it's definitely a little more like difficult to like gain access to those things for yourself. And I think too, it's definitely a challenge to be at this point of being an emerging artist, and you're starting out. So it's like, you still need to make money and, afford to live your life. And then you also need to like find time to pursue your passion. So it's like, you have 2 full-time jobs, honestly, if you're really like wanting to do it. Yeah. So I think I was definitely a little, not surprised totally, but it's a lot. It's like intense, and you have to want it.
100%. Yeah. It's 2 full-time jobs for sure.
And I think like on the flip side of that coin as well, I think like Gabby's saying, like being in the institution provided so much support that like you don't realize that is there until you're taken out of it. But I feel very, very grateful to have gained the education that I have and been provided with this framework of knowledge surrounding contemporary art that is really going to guide me through my studio and my own endeavors, but I think also taught me like tons of life skills as well, and how to be a very critical thinker and how to be a problem solver. And I think now that I'm out of that context, there is a niceness to it, because like that institutional framework is very, very hypercritical and very like theory and research driven, and like that the knowledge of how to work theoretically and like under this belt of like heavy research is one that I am so entirely grateful for. And I just find like being out of that now has like kind of like released me into this like pool ocean void blank space where it's like just me in the studio now, and like I'm swimming alone, but like what's cool about that is I kind of get to like do whatever I want now. And like I'm at a point where before when I was in school, I used to like really disregard my drawing practice, especially, and like discredit all the drawings. I like would always just call them studies and like not want them to be like the final work, but I always like came back to like drawing. And like I realize now out of the institution, like it's because I love to draw, and like being an artist is also like part of like really having a passion for like creating things, whether that be like physical objects or like creating these like spaces of existence. And so I feel like that has been really, really refreshing, and something that has been really beneficial being out of the school is I'm like not thinking about it as much, and it's like just kind of allowing me to like shed some boundaries and like really just like be free and reconnect with like what it means to be a maker and like to love to make things. So
that's a really great plus side of kind of leaving that institution, and that you had the framework to know what you wanted to create, and now there's no boundaries. You can just go for it. Raewyn, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, and I think like just to kind of echo what Gabby and Skylar were both saying, like it's hard to appreciate what a hive the institution is until you're out of it. And now like even just, you know, getting photocopies is like, you know, you set aside like an hour, where I used to be able to just like walk down the hall and get that done. But I think, yeah, especially like being out of the institution now and in this pandemic, like, you know, not only, you know, do you like, the possibilities are like more sort of limitless without sort of these deadlines and having to bring something into a crit that you've like fully thought out and fully realized. And I think also like working a lot more with things that are accessible has been a big part of this like transition as well. And not, you know, like when I was at school, I was like, what do I want to do? Like I could build something in the wood shop, or like I can silk screen, like I can, you know, go into ceramics and like, you know, whip up some crazy glaze, but those aren't the choices anymore. And so I think that it's sort of forced me to be a little bit more creative within my limitations, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah.
But yeah, it's been weird.
Yeah, and it's I think there's a challenge as well, because right now you can't see other artists as much, and you can't really have these conversations as much aside from Zoom. And there's something different about having an online conversation versus like having an in-person studio visit or an in-person kind of working together communal space. So you're working very solo, and you're kind of up to your own methods,
yeah,
which has pros and cons. I think it just is different.
And like ironically, like the crits were always sort of not necessarily like the dreaded thing, but like the thing that you'd be like stressed out about and like getting like kind of anxious and cagey about, where now like that seems to be the thing that I'm missing the most. And like I moved into like a place in the summer, and I have this like old garage out back, and it's very cold in there. And it's like, I don't know, it's just not the most like hospitable place to be making work. Like, and we have like space heaters and stuff, you know, you can get it warmer, but I don't know, there's just like I've lost the plot. I'm sorry.
I totally knew where you were going. It's all good. Uii, are you working from your home? Are you continuing to work after school?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel quite different to some of the things that were mentioned, because I think like it's true. I feel very lucky, and I feel very privileged to have gone to school, and particularly for art. I feel like I learned a lot, but then I started feeling, especially my fourth year, like I was hitting a lot of walls institutionally. And yeah, I feel like the work that I make now, I actually didn't have any support in the school for it, technically speaking, or yeah, just like nobody taught me how to 3D animate, and it's not even a program that exists in the university or really anywhere that I know of in Calgary. So I think I just feel differently because as a new media artist, I was definitely like exploring, and I didn't feel limited necessarily to like the studio access or resources I had. I actually had instances where I had ideas and I wanted to access like a laser cutter in my university, and I was in the wrong media stream, so they wouldn't, you know, anyway, it's just like, it's funny because I think that as wonderful as institutions are, I feel like, especially since the pandemic, it's interesting noticing how institutions fail. And it's not to say that they're a total loss or anything like that. I think it's just that work still needs to be done. And yeah, quite honestly, I feel really happy to be out of the institution. I feel the only thing that seems to have changed in my practice is really just like the ability I have to trust myself more, to trust my instincts. I think sometimes there's a lot of gaslighting that happens in institutions, and someone here mentioned hypercriticality, which I think is also really true. And I think that those are all intense colonial frameworks to think through. And I'm interested, I guess, in how we come to articulate what art is today. And those are all things that are always on my mind. But yeah, I feel so glad to be out and to just be, I think all of us are sort of in that place where it's like, we all love making, you know, like we're all gonna keep making. And I think if anything, what I wish would happen more is that people would listen to young people like us, because I think we are the future. And I think we are talking about really important things about the future that should be taken seriously. And as emerging artists, it is, one would have to have extreme resilience, as Gabby was saying earlier. Like it is, we are literally in such unpredictable, uncertain times that I don't think as emerging artists we're facing like the normal circumstance of tenacity. I think we're confronted with so many more barriers than the average emerging artist. So, you know, for this opportunity, I'm like so grateful. You know, it's one of like few opportunities that's actually come through this past year. And I think it's worth mentioning that it's not just on our individual ambition, it's also the world around us, which we're all very attuned to, I think, to some capacity through our works and just personally. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's I think that probably sums up like a lot of thoughts on like leaving the institution, and I think it's important to be critical of where you're going, and even you can be grateful and critical at the same time, and you can kind of realize what you took from it, but also it's important to be critical, and especially in an arts institution, I feel like that's what you're there for, is to rethink and maybe it's not always conducive to that, and that's where that change needs to happen, right?
Yes, and I think like I'm not from Alberta, so I have like an outsider perspective for sure, but like I feel very grateful. I feel immensely, as I say, I feel like immensely privileged and immensely grateful for everything I learned and everything I was able to accomplish during that time. I do think it's realistic to be like, we could do better, you know?
100%.
We could always do better.
Agreed, totally. I think that kind of leads into my next question, and I'll go right to you, Uii. What your future plans are as an artist? Do you have anything coming up? Are you just going to keep working? Do you want to share anything?
Sure. Yeah, I actually am working with a digital art company in town called ASMA, Axis Z Media Arts. And they do a number of large-scale projection mapping installs in the city. Historically, they've done a number of public art events, but it's all media-based, and there are elements of interactive based works. So I am getting more involved. I didn't really see this coming because I remember taking an interactive object class in university and really struggling with it and thinking like, I'll never do this again. And now I'm kind of getting into it a lot more. So that's been a pleasant surprise, but also a bit of a challenge because I feel like with any kind of like electronics or working interactively and then also conceptually, it's like a lot more work than the work that I do now, but I will continue making like weird 3D animated art videos, and I hope I can do installation. I feel like that's probably going to be on hold for a little bit, but yeah, that's what's happening.
Great, awesome. Raewyn, what do you have going on?
For now, like just getting in the studio as much as I can and making. I've been sort of like focused on these works on paper for the past couple of months, but I want to get back into sort of my like sculptural stuff and just try to make like some work that's really lighthearted because I think I need it. We all need it right now. So yeah, that's the extent of it for the meantime.
Awesome. Skylar?
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat as Ray, where I'm just getting in the studio as much as I can and like, yeah, really just like taking joy in making things, especially in this very like unprecedented, precarious time. So I feel like it's also been like a really therapeutic outlet to like, and a catharsis to be able to make things right now. But yeah, other than that, just kind of like riding up the wave of COVID as well and seeing what happens here. But yeah, really just enjoying being in the studio right now.
Awesome. Gabby?
Yeah, to reiterate that as well. Miss Pilsner Canada, she's still my gal. And I have about 1,000 ideas right now that I really need to articulate. I've been working more like the pink posters in the show. I've been really into advertisements recently. So I think this is the tip of the iceberg for a magazine that I want to do. So that's going to have my focus for the next little while. And yeah, just mastering the balance of life right now is what I'm working towards.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a constant battle, right?
That's lifelong. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that is all the questions from me. I want to thank all of you for taking the time today, for being so eloquent about your practices, for sharing some really personal things. So it's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that I can see you all in the gallery soon, when this wave ends. That's it. Does anyone have anything they want to say?
No, thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you, Vivian. This has been so great, and I think all of us have kind of said like how grateful we are to have this opportunity. So thank you so much.
You are most welcome. It's been lovely. Thank you all, and I'll talk to you soon.